See everybody here climbing. My name is Davinia Kogan. I'm the Access to Finance lead here at the GDC. Um, we've got an hour or so of discussion ahead of us, which is bound to be very fruitful and dynamic because obviously a lot is shifting in the carbon credit sector. We're very grateful to the UK government's Transforming Energy Access platform, as we wouldn't be able to deliver content like this without their support. And as always, please drop your questions into the chat box. Someone from our team will get back to you as we go. There's also going to be a dedicated Q&A session in the second half of the webinar. So you can, pose your questions as we go in the chat box, but there will also be a question, a section where you can pose your question directly to one of our speakers. And just a little bit of housekeeping as well. If you can add your organization name in brackets just behind your name so we know where you're joining us from. And then also just please keep yourselves muted. Unless you're speaking, please just switch your camera off just to minimize distractions for our fellow audience members. So let's kick off, take a quick look at what we're going to cover today. Beautiful. So first up, I'm going to invite the SPOUTS team to just give us a brief overview of what exactly is a carbon project, just in really straightforward terms before we sort of get into any jargon. We're also going to have a poll for you as well, just to better gauge your experience with carbon finance. And then I will hand over to my colleague Alice. Alice is the lead author of the upcoming GDC paper which looks at carbon credits in the last mile distribution sector, which we refer to as the LMD sector. So if you're new to our webinars, you'll hear that acronym a lot, last mile distribution, LMD. Alice is going to give us an overview of the report's key findings, our recommendations, and specifically what our members said during the research process. We'll then hear from two members, Sistema.bio and SPOUTS International, and they have been working with carbon finance for several years. So Esther, Daniel, and Ronald, they will all be able to reflect on their carbon finance journeys to date, and also share with us what they've learned and how they've sort of stayed on top of things as the market has been quite dynamic. So if we jump to the next slide, you can see everybody who will be with us today. And on that note, I'll jump to the next slide, which is what is a carbon project. So I'll hand you over to Ronald now, and he will explain to us in quite simple terms, what does it mean when we talk about a carbon project? Over to you, Ronald.
All right, thank you so much. So a carbon project, in simple terms on our end, as spouts of water, is this is a way we reach. This is a way we reach out to communities, and at Spouts, our carbon projects are kind of designed around a simple reality where the communities that most need safe drinking water solutions are often the hardest to reach through traditional market models. So such households that we work with are typically very rural areas where we access clean water solutions. That where access to clean water solutions is very, very limited, and where boiling water using firewood and charcoal is the primary method for making water safe. So for Spouts, carbon projects is where we come in with our solution of clean drinking water. And in that, we are able to generate carbon credits from these projects from these projects. So we are able to provide impact at the same time, generate carbon credits. That's what we refer to as a carbon project.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ronald. I think, yeah, there's a lot of jargon in this space, and I think it's really nice to just anchor it in a real world practical example. So with that framing in mind, we're going to now look to you, the audience. This is really designed just for last mile distributors joining us. So if you're not representing a last mile distributor, please don't answer this poll. You should now see some questions pop up on your screen, and please just take a few minutes to read through. And again, if you're an LMD, please go ahead and answer these. And if you're not, just leave it alone. Okay, I think that's a good amount of time. Do we have the results? So they're going to pop up. Okay, so here we go. Do you have any experience setting up a carbon project? We've got 33% saying yes. I think that's actually very high. So yeah, essentially a third saying yes, they do have experience. Not sure how big the sample is. It doesn't tell us that. But anyway, let's kick on. So I'm going to hand you over now to my colleague Alice. She's the lead author of the GDC research, which we'll be publishing in a couple of weeks. And yes, over to you, Alice.
Great. Thank you, Davina. So, hi everyone. I'm Alice Morton. I'm a climate consultant who works at the intersection of climate technology and climate policy. And I should probably say up front, I used to work for Cocoa Networks, a clean cook stove company, which recently ran into a bit of trouble with its carbon project. And as a result, I think that gives me a unique perspective to talk to you today about what's happening in the carbon markets, and what the challenges are and how they can be avoided. I'm really pleased that everyone's able to join. We're going to present a subset of the overall report. I think there's a lot of complexity and a lot of numbers and challenges around methodologies. We just won't have time to go into all of it today. We're going to keep it high level for now so that we can spend a bit more time on the discussion later. Great, cool. So next slide, please. Great, thank you. So overall, our summary of what we found looking at the carbon markets over the last year. It's been quite a difficult time in carbon markets. Setting up a carbon project is definitely not easy, and it takes a lot of patience and effort. And we'll talk about each of these findings in detail. I think our message for those on the call today, though, is if you do decide that you want to set up a carbon project, there are some good ways to de-risk that process. And we've got some perspectives to share on that. Next slide, please. Cool. So, yeah, it's been a difficult time for carbon markets recently. I think there's two big challenges that have happened. First of all, the voluntary carbon market, which is often called the VCM, that was growing quite rapidly. And then a few years ago, it suddenly had a bit of a crash. So it was previously valued at over $2 billion USD, and it's now about $500 million USD. So it's shrunk to a quarter of its original size. And what that really means is that the demand and the pricing for carbon credits has shifted quite significantly. And yeah, that's particularly relevant for last mile distributors because they are typically selling avoidance credits. And avoidance credits have suffered a bit more than removal credits with regards to pricing and demand. Quickly, for those who don't know, so like an avoidance credit is where the technology or product used avoids releasing carbon emissions. A removal project, by comparison, is taking carbon emissions out the air and storing it. Unfortunately, this market demand, I think, doesn't really reflect how necessary avoidance credits are. avoidance credits typically do have a really meaningful climate mitigation impact, but they also come with really important co-benefits that support national development strategies and economic growth. Cool. Next slide, please. So yeah, as we just discussed, prices have dropped for avoidance credits, but there is now serious differentiation between high quality credits and low quality credits. And by which I mean, if you have credits that are rated as high quality and high integrity, you can sell them for much more, maybe double the price. And so what are high quality credits? There's a number of different factors that influence this, and I'm only going to be able to touch on a couple of them. The first is that high quality credits use conservative baselines. The baseline is how much greenhouse gas emissions were emitted before the project started. And if the baselines are deemed too high, you are likely to be qualified as a low integrity project. The second item is about using up-to-date methodologies. Many methodologies have existed for calculating emissions reductions from carbon projects, but some have deemed to be higher quality than others. Recently, there has been an attempt to classify which ones are high quality and which ones are low quality. And so you can find this using the integrity standards and the CCPs, and there's more about that in the report. The other factor we see that influences whether a project is high integrity or not is whether there is robust monitoring and verification. And a key trend here is that increasingly digital monitoring is becoming a standard and is preferred and can drive up the price of your credits. Finally, I think the key point to note is that third-party standards bodies, including B0 and Silvera, will rate carbon projects according to whether they think they are high integrity and high quality. And if you have a good rating from one of these companies, it's not essential to get a rating, but if you do have a good rating, you will find that you are likely to get a higher price for those credits. That's just a really high level summary. There is so much more detail, but let's proceed to the next slide. So yeah, just to recap, there are really two types of carbon markets. We have the voluntary carbon markets, which was traditionally very large, but is now shrinking. But it's still a really important place where organizations and individuals can offset their carbon emissions. The compliance markets represent a newer source of demand, which typically comes with more regulation. And this is because compliance credits directly impact a country's NDCs. So they're nationally determined contributions of what they want to achieve in their climate goals with the UN. And so compliance credits require something called a corresponding adjustment, and that affects the country's NDCs. So if you're the project that hosts the carbon, the country that hosts the carbon project, they will make a deduction against their budget in order to allow another country to do emissions reductions. And so there's more on that in the report, but it's a really important factor because it drives additional regulation and it drives additional processes and it often drives additional fees. Great. So moving on to the next slide. What we found was two things that really impact whether your project is likely to be successful. One is what type of technology you are selling. So different credits have different values on the market, and different types of projects also deliver higher yields. So at the moment, a cook stove project is likely to generate more credits than a solar lamps project, for example. Similarly, in order to offset the costs of setting up a project and in order to get to the higher yields, you need to be selling a lot of units in order to generate the emissions reductions. And therefore, if you're only selling, and this varies by type of technology, so it's quite hard to pinpoint, but if you are not selling enough if you're not selling enough products, then you're unlikely to earn enough credits to make it worth your while in setting up a project. Cool. So we'll jump to the next slide. This is also pretty critical. In recent years, governments have introduced a lot of fees and a lot of regulation and a lot of processes around credits. These differ for every country, so it's very hard to give you a view of how much that costs, because it's different for each country. But generally, it is really adding to the cost of setting up a carbon project. It's making it much harder for developers to get a return on their investment, because a chunk of their revenue or a chunk of their profits will be going to the government. I think also a key point to note is different governments support different technologies and different products, so like clean cook stoves or solar, to different extents. And so ideally, if you're launching a carbon project, it matters whether the government involved is favourable towards your type of project. So I think, for example, in Kenya, there's some mixed signals around clean cooking, but I think in Malawi and Tanzania, they're much more supportive, and maybe it's easier to get a clean cooking project through the processes in those countries. And I say maybe in quotation marks. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we'll jump to the next slide. Carbon projects. It's really about balancing risk and reward. And it's difficult, but it can be worth it. And I think Daniel and Esther will be able to give really good perspectives on how the carbon credits have positively impacted their businesses. And I think the challenge is they are really difficult to make work with the rising costs. And as all the calculations and methodologies involved become more conservative, it's harder to get that return on investment. I think a challenge now is for companies who are thinking about doing this is to balance that risk and decide whether or not it's worth it. Just to talk recently about like what's happened with cocoa, companies are really at risk if they base their whole revenue model on carbon. And it's definitely not an easy cash cow. And that's something we heard again and again from developers. The challenge is a project is only considered additional if it would not have happened anyway, if the carbon project wasn't there. So what this means is that treated as the cherry on top, it's meant to be essential. If you didn't have the carbon project, then you wouldn't be able to deliver these impacts. But that introduces a lot of risk for the carbon project developers, because it's meant to be an essential part of their business model. But there are so many uncertainties and so many costs involved. So we'll talk about that a bit more in the Q&A, because I think it's important challenge for people to be aware of. And I think there's more detail on additionality in the paper itself. For now, we'll jump to the next slide. Great. So we did a lot of research into the cost of setting up a carbon project. We used sources including the World Bank and including USAID, including also the fees from the regulators themselves. And it's important to note that the ones that we're showing you here do not include those government fees we discussed on the first slide. And essentially, the cost of setting up and maintaining a carbon project are very, very, very high. And there's ways to reduce them. And they come down if you've done many projects, because you can reduce some of the upfront costs you had the first time around in setting up monitoring and doing feasibility studies. But generally, if you're a first-time carbon project developer, it's quite a lot of effort. Some of that is spent on the setup costs, but a lot of it is hidden in monitoring and verification. And then the second challenge around those costs is you don't start to see revenues come in until a couple of years into the project. On here, it could be even as much as 5 years before you see the positive annual cash flow. And so, yeah, that's the high-level message. Within the report, you'll see a breakdown of all the costs and hopefully and more detail on who's involved. Next slide, please. Cool. So if you do go ahead, and we appreciate that not everyone should do carbon projects, they may not want to. But if you do go ahead, there's lots of ways to de-risk those carbon projects. And I think there's a lot of research involved. There's a lot of papers out there, and some of them are easier to read than others. There's a lot of free material online as well, not necessarily behind a paywall. But I think the most valuable thing you can do is speak to other carbon project developers, and including GDC members specifically who have done this before, because they'll be able to tell you really exactly some of the pitfalls and challenges that they experienced, and how to avoid them. You can get in touch with industry associations as well. The big ones probably for this group are probably going to be GOGLA for solar, and CCA, the Clean Cooking Alliance. Both of those organizations have done a lot of research into carbon credits, and they've published some materials around that. And then you can get up-to-date information on sector trends from a mixture of sources, including Abatable, Silvera, and B0. Silvera and B0 are those rating agencies we discussed before. They're really important, but a lot of their information is really high quality, and I think they do a good job of making it easy to read and digest. Cool. I think those were the main points. I think in terms of the fundamentals, in the paper, there's going to be a lot of detail on all of those considerations, and including that point around additionality. We sadly can't cover them all today. I think it's better to, I've got a bit of a cold, so hand over to someone else to do the speaking in a second. But yeah, please look out for the paper coming soon, and we hope you find it useful. Cool. And yeah, slides 16 and 17, I don't want to read them out to you, but we did speak to a lot of GDC members in writing this report. And these were the things that they advised in terms of tips. You do need some financial capital. You do need that significant scale. Avoid negative PR by being conservative and not trying to overstate your carbon offsets. And you need to have quite a lot of information on your customers, because you'll need to be able to report with very high accuracy how many customers you have in order to get those carbon credits. Next slide, please. As we've discussed at length about the regulation issue, it's really important to know your country of operations regulation really well. And it's hard to do because those regulations do change. The biggest way you can de-risk is actually to get a buyer to buy your credits upfront and potentially even provide the funding for the setup costs. I think generally carbon credits offer really important co-benefits, and telling the story around that will help boost the value of your credits. And then, yeah, finally, I think we heard that there are a lot of experienced consultants out there. There are a lot of carbon cowboys. So yeah, it's worth actually getting some second opinions on who you should use. Definitely talk to other GDC members and other carbon project developers in your sector. Okay, great. So I think that's the end of my points for today. I'll hand over to is it Esther first, to talk a little bit more about Sistema, and then hopefully we can get into some discussion in the Q&A. Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Alice. That was really, really helpful summary and refreshing to see it in such simple but efficient words. I'm Esther. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Sistema.bio. Really happy to be here today. If you can move to the next slide. Sistema.bio has been working for 15 years with farmers to all over the world. We started in Mexico, expanded then to East Africa and India, and now work in over 30 countries with partners and distributors. We have installed over 150,000 biodigesters, impacted over 1 million people. It's a very exciting growth story, but it has taken a lot of time, and it has had its ups and downs as well. I don't want to make it all sound shiny. Yeah, and we're about $24 million in revenue last year and have around 300 employees, and we're set out for significant growth this year as well. So if you go to the next slide, this is our product. So a biodigester treats animal waste. You put it in one side, mix it with water, and then comes out biogas, which is a clean and renewable energy that can be used for cooking, for water heating, for larger systems at large farms. It can be used for producing electricity or other sort of more productive energy uses. And on the other side comes out a powerful organic fertilizer. So the way we reduce greenhouse gas emissions is by treating the manure. Manure is emitting methane, which is 28 times as powerful of a greenhouse gas as CO2. So it's called a super pollutant because of how pollutant it is. And we also provide clean and renewable energy by replacing charcoal, firewood, LP gas, and this organic fertilizer that can displace up to all chemical fertilizers on the farm. Just in terms of our model, we manufacture the biodigester, we distribute it, sell it, install it, and provide financing to our customers through carbon credits, but also lease to own systems or other type of results-based financing. If you go to the next one, this is a little bit of the why our climate solutions stand out, and I'm glad to see we're checking quite a lot of the boxes that Alice mentioned. The really important thing that was not mentioned is that we do have boots on the ground, so we're not carbon project developer that sells something. We have over 70% of our staff that is directly in contact with farmers every day on the ground. We have a very hands-on approach. You've seen in the previous slide, we provide a 10-year warranty, so we're physically there with our customers. We did acquire in 2024 Inclusive Energy, which is a DMRV digital monitoring, reporting, and verification platform that allows us to really provide this technical accuracy that Alice was mentioned. And we're very, very focused, being a mission-driven company, on the affordability of our product, on this additionality that Alice was mentioning, and try to really put all of our carbon funds where they're most needed, which is in the hands of farmers, to really improve the affordability of our products. That's it for me now, and I look forward to the discussion in a few.
Wonderful. Thank you, Esther. I'm going to hand it over to you now, Daniel.
Amazing. Thanks. Thanks, Esther. Thanks, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Daniel. I'm the CEO of SPOUTS International. Pleasure to be here. Maybe the next slide. Before I just dive into this slide, into the business model, maybe I can give you a quick brief on SPOUTS and then what we do. I think Ronald's already given you a preview, but SPOUTS, we manufacture and distribute ceramic water filters. They're named the Purifier. Maybe some of you have used it before. I know Ronald has, so at least there's one person on this call who's using it. But currently we're the largest ceramic water filter manufacturer in Africa, and then hopefully soon, in like the coming months, we're going to be the largest in around the globe, which we're super excited about. A big catalyst for that growth has been carbon, so I'm excited to speak more about our experience. Again, it's not all roses, which I believe Esther has mentioned. There was a lot of ups and downs, but if done correctly, as Alice was mentioned, it could be a vital asset to your business model. So our business model, it's kind of split up into two pieces. We have like a two-pronged approach. One is that we manufacture and distribute ceramic water filters in our commercial channel, which is where we sell more B2B, B2C, just as any traditional company, I guess you can say. This is more targeted towards urban, peri-urban areas, or maybe some rural areas who has the capacity to pay for our water filters, which range from $20 to $80. And then the other side are carbon projects. And I think Ronald's already mentioned like how we're able to generate carbon credits by negating the need for boiling your water to treat it using firewood or charcoal. We can now treat that water without using any fuel at all. So we have carbon origination projects as well, and we're targeting more rural, vulnerable communities that otherwise would not be able to afford our water filters. We have operations in Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya, which is where I'm calling from in Nairobi. And just to dive a little bit deeper into our carbon strategy, I would say like 2 or 3 years ago, we were primarily in the VCM market. When the market was much larger, it was around $2 billion in size. But I would say in the past 2 to 3 years, we've been actively transitioning our projects and our carbon credits to more on the compliance side. So one of the big milestones that we've been able to reach recently is that we've been able to get CORSIA labeled credits. So we're now able to sell into the compliance market to airlines. And then also we do have projects lined up for Singapore 6.2. So basically not selling, basically selling more into the tax scheme of a specific country. Both now, as in Alice's slide, I think the VCM was on the left. And then now we have we're focusing more on turning those into the right. And I think that's a way to basically de-risk carbon credits. But again, a lot of work that went into it. I think for CORSIA credits, getting those labeled, it took us 3 years. But again, happy to share our experiences to show, hey, maybe you don't have to go through 3 years of pain to get that done, right? So yeah, happy to share that later on during the Q&A. Maybe the next slide. And the way that we're able to basically solidify and establish our business model is through like our mission as an organization, what I like to really call like our North Star. Our North Star is how can we provide safe and clean drinking water to everyone, right? To everyone who needs it. And that's how we develop both the commercial model and then the carbon origination project, so the other side of the business model. And to date, we've been able to manufacture and distribute over 350,000 filters. We've also been able to install 200,000 cook stoves through our last mile distributor model, and then reduce carbon emissions by 1.5 million tons. And then most importantly is again, like our North Star, we're able to reach over 2 million people and provide them with long-term access to safe drinking water. Just this year alone, we're looking to basically do over 500,000 filters sold. So basically what we've done since 2015 to now, we're looking at more than doubling that just this year. And again, a lot of that is through these carbon projects, these carbon credits, but then mostly on the compliance side.
Beautiful.
Great.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Esther. Let's dive in and have a chat. So, I mean, the traction looks super impressive, but obviously it's taken a lot of work for both Sistema.bio and Spouts International to get to where you are today. So I guess my question is multi-pronged. Firstly, have you always been carbon project developers, or was there a time that you didn't have a carbon project? And then the second part of this is what was involved in setting up a carbon project. And I'm talking money, people, hiring new staff, the commitment to carbon as an organization. Does it need to infiltrate every single bit of the company? Yeah, maybe Daniel, you can kick us off and then we'll jump to Esther.
Yep, definitely. So I joined Spouts and I moved to Uganda, where I lived for 8 years in 2017. And I remember as soon as I moved, the co-founder had something on my desk when I came in and it was about carbon credits. I had no idea like what a carbon credit was. But it was interesting, right? And there was a lot of potential and I wanted to learn more about it. So one of, I would say, the big decisions that I made in my role at Spouts was, hey, let's look into this and let's see if this is like, a long-term option for Spouts. So from that point on, it took us 3 years to actually register our carbon credits with the gold standard. And yeah, got very fortunate with that decision that we were able to scale it. In terms of making like carbon, we had a big discussion 2 years ago as a management team saying, do we want carbon to be a pillar of our organization? And that was a very debated topic, right? Because it was pretty volatile at the time. There wasn't a lot of certainty around the market, especially in the long term. But what we decided was, hey, we're going to make it a pillar and we're going to basically try to de-risk it as much as possible. And that's when we started trying to get letters of approval, letters of authorization to really see like, okay, if we're going to have it as a pillar, let's try to make it as strong of a pillar as possible. And that's how we did risk it through the LOAs and started the process towards Corsia and towards Article 6.2. So that's basically when we made those, I would say, big decisions internally. And then the last bit is kind of the finances. How did we make that happen? I think in a way, the finance, it's hard to finance when you don't have the product, you have just the strategy and a plan, right? So it took us a while. So we brought in some equity investors, we brought in some debt investors, but we also brought in some off-takers, so the parties buying the credits to finance it. And it was a blend of everything, basically people who believed in the company, believed in our ability to execute. And then that's how we were able to finance it. But again, it took a very long time, and we had to prove it each and every step of the way to keep the confidence of these investors. And I think Ronald's smiling because he was part of those debates of, hey, do we want to include carbon as a pillar? It was a very heated topic, but it was very important for us as a management team to really be aligned. If we're going to do this, we're going to go 100% all in, and we're going to bring in the right stakeholders to support.
Okay. It sounds like an incremental ramp up, and now it's very much a key part of the business model. And Esther, how about the experience at Sistema.bio?
Yeah, I mean, Sistema.bio is a very interesting case in that sense because it was the very, very first business plan before Sistema.bio even existed as a legal entity was written with carbon credits at its core to create the affordability angle, and that was in 2009 in the very first sort of boom of carbon credits post Kyoto Protocol and other things like that sound very far away today. And then so from the very early days, there was this very, very strong focus on long-term service, long-term commitment, data collection, data accuracy. And then these carbon markets all collapsed around 2012 when the company had been founded in 2010. And so we really maintained this whole culture of really like very, very high customer satisfaction, of data collection, data accuracy, impact measurement. And when I joined in 2014, it was just obvious that we were doing this because it was the right thing to do without even hearing or thinking about carbon credits. So it became really ingrained into what we do. And then we built a model that worked without carbon credits. I mentioned our lease to own mechanism before. We grew internationally, expanded, had a few profitable years, and then came this renewed carbon boom around 2019, 2020, 2021. And this is when we started looking into this again and registered a program in Kenya in 2019, followed by other programs in India and so on. But it wasn't a big change from our internal processes because it was already so ingrained. What did happen, though, is that similar to what Dan said, we started hiring technical experts, working first with consultants and then progressively building this competence in-house. And then we had this carbon team. And today, we actually have a global call today with our entire staff, over 500 people. One of the key messages is everyone is on the carbon team. Every single technician, every single sales agent, every person who's manufacturing a biodigester. So really spreading out this carbon. Carbon is not something that a small team is doing somewhere. We're all in this, and we're all responsible for at least 10 years of customer satisfaction. And so Yeah, I think similar to Spouts and general trends, we've really initially focused on the voluntary market. And then today we have very, very strong voluntary carbon programs, but we also have Article 6.2 programs with Switzerland, in Malawi, and got initial approvals for Kenya and Peru as well. So this is exciting, and it's a very important to diversify the carbon offtake strategy as much as possible. What we also have been working a lot is with carbon insetters. So in our sector, mostly dairy companies like Danone and Nestle, who are looking to reduce their in-house carbon emissions in their supply chain, what is called the Scope 3, and looking for suppliers or companies that can help them do that. So we work with the milk farmers of Danone, provide them with a biodigester, and then Danone can account for this in their internal emissions reductions. So that's also something interesting. It's a different pathway, but it's all linked to carbon reductions at the end.
Yeah. And I can imagine, like, if I in my role, I speak with many of our LMDs, and many of them, maybe they have a team of sort of like 3 people running the whole show. So I guess, yeah, like the carbon markets have evolved. I'd say Sistema.bio and Spouts both have like reasonably sophisticated, let's say you've got like multi-pronged approaches to carbon credit. So you're selling them to what methodologies you're using, etc. Do you think that it's feasible these days for a small LMD to get involved, and by involved, I mean setting up a carbon project in-house, if they are a small team? Is that something that's feasible? Do you need to have, permanent staff in-house, or is it something that a CEO plus consultants could, manage to set up a project for the first time? I'm just really interested in Esther. Maybe I'll start with you and then go to Daniel on your perspectives on this.
I think it depends. If they have a lot of money, certainly they can. I mean, that's the easy answer. I think I would say if the basics are in place, meaning having a very, very robust product, a proven impact, proven greenhouse gas avoidance reductions or potentially removal, and if that is very solid, and maybe third-party certified. We started out, when we restarted in 2019, started with a developer, an intermediary. So it's not great because they do charge a significant amount, but it's the easiest way to start. So I think it's possible to start with a consultant who's a technical carbon expert, and then having a carbon project developer or an intermediary doing the selling of carbon credits for you. If you have, again, a strong product, a strong like customer journey, strong data collection processes in place, that's, I think, what I would, and time and money. So maybe, yeah. So it's possible if is the summary.
Yeah, you'd have to be pretty dedicated, I'm guessing. Like that's going to
Well,
be.
it's two-pronged. I think you have to have something that works on its own and have some funds to dedicate to external support.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Daniel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very aligned with what Esther just mentioned. Time and money is always very helpful. But if like I'm just putting myself in like kind of those shoes, if we were to basically just start from scratch, what I would probably do is just, yeah, make sure that the business model fits. Like you can show additionality, it's a feasible business model, and then it's sustainable as well. Then I would probably bring in like a consultant or something along those lines. And then you can work at getting those, like I would say, key items like a non-objection letter or an LOA. Like these are the gateways. Like once you get that, the potential for these carbon credits increases immensely, right? So then that you don't need like a full-time carbon expert, like full-time staff to get. You just need the time, essentially, and then the support internally. Local stakeholder relations are really key there. But if you can then get that, then you can probably start investing in more full-time staff. So you're not putting all of your eggs and your investments in that, because I think starting a company, cash flow is the king, right? You need that, right? And then at the same time, as soon as you get those LOAs, you bring in like-minded investors, people on the board that will support you, right? I think a lot of people, investors that we see today, is that they really like the idea of carbon credits. There's like significant upside, but they don't want to take on the risk. So even if you bring them on, then you're basically going to be paused. And I've been through that, and it's a bit frustrating. So I would probably just say, like, again, you can de-risk it by just inching forward. And then as you unlock more milestones, you can invest a little bit more. So you're not just putting all of your eggs in, like, full-time employees, etc., where, things can go south.
Okay. One thing on de-risking I wanted to touch on, Daniel, you said that you managed to raise debt, equity, and also you had carbon credit buyers, off-takers fund the projects upfront. Curious about who are those potential off-takers? Like, who would be interested? Are they people that you already had a relationship with and knew that sort of like trusted you to execute? Who, without saying who they are, like what sort of
Yeah.
profile? Yeah.
Yeah. So typically, what we started off with like a broker or like other carbon developers. And we started off with a very small project. It was around 30,000 filters, and would able to generate, like tens of thousands of credits per year. And this was back in 2022. I think Michael's on the call as well. He was the one spearheading a lot of the distribution there in Uganda. So I think the main thing is like we use that as kind of our ability to show that we can execute and we can execute well. So we took our time. We spent more money than a budget required, but it was really just to show everyone, hey, we can do this and we can do this well. And then that laid the platform for that one partner to continue actually that relationship with us and scale that project. We're still working with that developer today, actually. And that was just like, just experience and like the ability to scale with one another. And I think that's where you need someone to basically take that risk with you in the first place and then really just nurture that relationship and then grow together.
Right. And Esther, at Sistema.bio, I know you've done some interesting things around risk reduction. Are you able to share like a couple of different initiatives that you've taken, whether it's, currently or a few years back, to reduce the risk of implementing these projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think one important aspect to emphasize on is that between the moment when you actually design your project and do the submission to Gold Standard, get certified, actually implement the project, and then issue the credits, multiple years can go by. And that's why we've been as priority looking for carbon credit buyers who are pre-financing the carbon credits. And this is really something very important. And even if you sell maybe your ton of CO2 at a lower price, at least you have upfront cash to implement the project, and then you have the top up on the later years of the project. So I think that was really interesting. And then we realized, especially at Sistema.bio, because we have to buy the raw material, manufacture, distribute, sell. I mean, there's a long working capital cycle. And so we decided again over 2 years ago now to try to build a separate carbon fund, which we call the Farm Carbon Fund, and that will be officially launched next week. So that has a separate part of investors and a separate risk model, a separate financial model. And the idea was really to separate our carbon business, I mean, at least legally, because I don't want to contradict myself. We're all in the carbon team, but then legally and financially, and from an investor perspective, we have carbon credit investors who take on all the carbon credit volatility and risk. And then we have our operating company, Sistema.bio, that manufactures, sells, installs. And that's what Dan was saying, like some investors are very comfortable with an intangible asset that's a carbon credit, but not that much with a manufacturing and last mile distributor. And others are comfortable with manufacturing and last mile, but not as much with carbon. So being able to separate those out is really, really a strategic aspect for us in terms of de-risking this in the long term.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very helpful for people. We have 5 minutes left. I am not seeing any questions come through on the chat. If you do have anything you'd like to ask, please jump in. Now is the time. I am going to, if there's no questions coming in, I'm going to ask Alice and Ronald a question. Because Ronald's role is he's the global carbon credit expert at SPOUTS International. So I think he has sort of like a big picture view on this, hopefully. And Alice also given her research. I would like to know, are there specific technologies that if I was selling, solar lanterns, should I be looking at this? If I'm selling cook stoves, should I be looking at this? What type of cook stoves? Can you give us a bit of an idea of the different technologies that there could be like a compelling or more attractive argument for getting into the carbon market? Or are there technologies where, it's probably not worth your while even doing a pre-feasibility study?
Thank you so much, Davinia. Like I hadn't introduced myself earlier. Ronald Ampire here, Spouts International, colleague with Daniel, and been working under our carbon projects for the past couple of years, about 6 years for Spouts International. Yes, back to your question. I believe every product is worth investing in for carbon projects, especially those improved cook stoves, water filters, solar, boreholes, biosystems, biochar, forests, reforestation, etc. The core bit everyone has to focus on is what you've built as a carbon investor or as a carbon developer. It's not. Yes, you might have the best product in the market. You might have the tier 4 cook stoves, tier 5. But then the system you've built as an organization is going to betray you. Like Daniel and Esther highlighted earlier on, to me personally, I don't think financial investment is the biggest investment you can make as a project developer. It's the investment into your team. The entire team has to breathe carbon. All of you have to breathe carbon, right from when you walk in at the office reception. Everyone has to breathe carbon. That's how you're able to sustain carbon projects. You have to build because there's a lot that is involved: feasibility assessments, documentation, everything that Daniel and Esther talked about. But then if the rest of the team is not aligned to the same goal, to the pillar for Spouts, we've made it a pillar, to the pillar, then your project is going to face a lot of hiccups when it comes to audits, when everyone is third-party audits, when it comes to monitoring. You need to establish internal quality controls and prepare for these things. But to me, I believe most of those all products that are able to generate carbon credits are worth looking into, even when there is those that might seem easier to work with. That's my submission.
It's great to hear that optimism. Alice, in 20 seconds, do you want to give us your answer? And then I'm going to close up.
So I think it varies a lot by country. I think it's worth different countries support different technologies to varying degrees. So that's one factor to consider. I do think that for solar home systems and for solar pico, like lamps, it's going to be really hard and probably too difficult. You need to be operating at like massive scale. And I think there are real questions around the additionality of those credits. Solar C&I, or like large scale solar, is slightly different, fits more in the renewable energy category. And I think it gives you more greater scale. So I think that's potentially still where I would say that might still be worth it. Yeah, cooking is tough, but it is still, carbon is an important part of the cooking business model for a lot of businesses. And without it, a lot of those it's going to be really hard to make clean cooking work. So I think it's still essential. Definitely consider it, but know that it would be hard. And then I think there are interesting sectors that are coming up, particularly around waste management and productive use of energy. These are really attractive areas right now for donors and for governments. So if you can align with those areas and find a methodology there, you might find that those credits, those technologies are definitely worth considering. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Nadia, I hope that sort of answered your question. I think we could do a whole webinar on this question of additionality versus not being the whole business model reliant on carbon finance. So thank you everybody for your engagement today. I'm going to move to the last slide here, where we would like to do, before you leave, a quick poll just to get your feedback on today's session. So hopefully that will pop up on your screens imminently. And just as you fill out that poll, and the poll is for everybody. So we're going to follow up with you. We'll be sharing the slides from today. I know there are a few questions popping up, which you'll have a copy of the slides so you can refer to them yourselves afterwards. We will also get the recording together and send that out. Usually takes a couple of days to pull that together, as well as the speaker contact details. Once the report is published in the next couple of weeks, we will also send that out, and that will also be on our website. And our next webinar is going to be on profitability in the LMD sector. We haven't set a date yet, but stay tuned. It will be in May or June. So yeah, with that, thank you very much. Please don't forget to fill out the polls. They're really important for us to get the feedback. And again, thank you so much to all our wonderful speakers today. Really honest and fruitful discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I hope our audience did too. And yeah, thanks for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. And have a beautiful day, everyone.